Up next is the closing keynote address. Edwin is the global managing partner of Dalberg Advisors, a leading strategy and policy advisory firm with 30 locations across Africa, the Americas, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Prior to being elected to this role, he served as the firm's Africa Regional Director. There, he was instrumental in building out the firm's footprint, talent, and capabilities across the continent. Edwin's time at Dalberg started with the founding of the Nairobi office in 2008. In his advisory capacity, Edwin supports clients on a range of issues, including strategy, operational efficiency, and program implementation. He's a board member of the Nature Conservancy and NABO Capital. He has previously been a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Africa between 2012 to 2014, and on the Risk and Resilience Council between 2014 and 2016. Edwin joined Dalberg from the Clinton Foundation, where he held multiple roles focused on rural communities. Prior to joining the Clinton Foundation, Edwin was a McKinsey & Company consultant, where he served clients in the financial services and pharmaceutical sectors. Edwin holds a degree in biology from Amherst College. He's been recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum and is an Archbishop Desmond Tutu Fellow. He was also listed by Forbes as one of the 10 most powerful men in Africa in 2015, and as one of the top 50 disruptors in Africa in 2020 by the Africa Report. Join me in welcoming Edwin to the stage.
Thanks a lot, Fola. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, Edwin. Welcome.
Yeah, no, every time I hear that bio read, I wonder who's this stranger if people are talking about. Doesn't feel like me. And, I look for the gray hair in my head, and there's a little bit of that in there, but not as much as the bio suggests. Great pleasure to be here with all of you. It's always tough to deliver a keynote address, first of all, at the end of the conference when everybody is, there's been so much content that's been covered, and I was unfortunately not able to join for most of yesterday, but listening to some of the conversations today. But it's even worse when you have to do it on Zoom and have to do it online. So you don't even get a sense of what the audience looks like, if the jokes are actually landing or not. So please bear with me if you hear a bad joke. Totally my fault. Just blame it on the fact that it's 10 p.m. in Nairobi on a Sunday and there's a long week ahead. But really exciting about this conversation about Africa and the path forward. And I think it's useful to combine the narrative across a few things. I was asked, to give a story of my life, and I thought maybe it's pointing out to key inflection points in my own career, but also what my thoughts are on the continent, what the experience has been building a business, particularly in these turbulent times, building and then leading a business through the COVID response. So my thoughts are a little bit scattered, but hopefully you'll get a flavor of the key things that are worth mentioning. So, as you heard, Edwin Macharia, born and raised in Kenya, went to school at Amherst, where, like every good African, we truly believe there are only 4 professions. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer, or a failure. Did not want the last one, was set on being a doctor, so I was pre-med, but came back to spend some time with my uncle, who was a district medical officer in Kenya at the time, during my junior year Christmas break, and very much realized the critical issues that are plaguing at the time Kenyan, but generally African and many countries, developing countries' healthcare systems, is not just the lack of capable individuals. It's not just the lack of doctors and nurses and so on and so forth. It truly is a management issue. It's a management question. And our health systems tend to be managed very much from a public sector perspective, without thinking of all the other providers of healthcare. And healthcare tends to be managed from a curative perspective. Rather than thinking about the continuum of care, which actually, as my good friend Dr. Gedenji Gitahi, the CEO of AMREF, says, the hospital is the garage that you take your body when it's broken. But actually, healthcare is in the community and it's at home. But there really isn't much work or as robust amount of work that gets done on that front. So that was an important inflection point in my life, where then I decided, instead of going to med school, instead I will go to McKinsey. And then spent, as an analyst in the New York office, really learning what does management really mean? What are these broad ecosystems? What are the pressures? How do you think about them? How do you find leverage points to really transform? And at the tail end of that experience, the Clinton Foundation was just getting started. And I'd lost my dad the year before. And so I wanted to come back home naturally to be closer to family. But more importantly, my heart has always and will always be on the continent. And so for me, it was an easy move to leave the Clinton Foundation and join CHAI, the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, which at the time I ended up being the first employee of. And so then I spent, a number of years helping build the foundation's operations and work across the African continent. And you can imagine young African dude with a big name behind you, literally being able to walk into almost any office and have a meaningful conversation, be it heads of states or heads of industry. And that highlighted to me just how important leadership is. You know that intellectually, but you don't appreciate the critical gaps and how important the governments are in execution on the ground. It's the only institution in any country that has both the mandate and the reach to touch every single person. And the more we try and shy away from engaging, working with, leading, changing government, and therefore by extension politics of a country, the more we'll run into this critical issue of, are we really making progress, or are we just trying to put band-aids on issues? And so I took a year sabbatical back in 2007, that was, to run for office in Kenya for Member of Parliament. And that was its own crazy experience. I always say there is, what seems like rational decisions to people, outside, people within the political ecosystem might seem completely irrational to people who are outside the system. And I think for those of us who get impatient with having poor leadership and bad leadership, it's so important that we actually understand and engage with the politics of our country and the public sector leadership of our countries. Otherwise, we'll keep running into this glass ceiling almost of there's only so much you can do as an entrepreneur, as building enterprise, if the core of governments are not working. Now, as you can imagine, that was its own experience. And I say I always achieved my primary aim, which was to beat the incumbent, who at the time was implicated in the largest corruption scandal, was the former Minister of Interior in the country. So, person with a lot of money and with a lot of influence with security services. It's an experience for another day. But I always say I achieved my primary aim, which was to beat him. Only one other guy beat both of us. So I came in second and he came in third in that election. But it had uncovered for me how much we look at issues, singular issues, versus recognize how interconnected they are. And I realized even at the Clinton Foundation, a lot of my work was really important in the health ecosystem, but there were so many other challenges that existed in society that were completely interlinked with the health outcomes we were seeing. It didn't matter how good your hospitals were or whether you got ARVs to people. If they didn't have nutrition, the impact of that was muted. The reason why they might not have nutrition could be agriculture practices. They don't know how to grow the appropriate food or the right kind of food. It could be trade issues that they can't access the right kind of seed. It could be finance issues that they can't finance, parts of the value chain of the agriculture value chain. It could be an energy issue. But most people who address these questions come at them from a singular perspective and think this is only about healthcare, this is only about agriculture, versus seeing that critical interplay. And that led to my second shift, which was then to move over and found Dalberg's Nairobi office, because I saw that interconnectedness, but just as importantly, I like building things. I like starting and building things. And here was an opportunity to build, a firm, the Africa presence of a firm that really wanted to change the trajectory of the world. And that's why Dalberg generally has this, our values and our motto are very anchored on this view that we want to create a world in which all people everywhere can reach their fullest potential. And that had certain, implications. One is fly in, fly out advisory consultants, like many of competitors and other firms do. If you're lucky, will only get you to maybe 30-40% of the answer. Everything else is context and everything else is networks. Without those, it is unlikely you will succeed. And especially now with the democratization of information as it is today, the chances are that entrepreneurs, business leaders, government officials are reading the exact same book, have the exact same understanding of the theories that many of us, many of the people who fly in, fly out purport to come and bring to them. But the thing is, there's something about the context, there's something about the reality they live in that makes it difficult to execute. So it's not a smarts question, it's not an access to knowledge question. It's truly that ecosystem, that there's something that is stopping them from achieving what should be achieved because they intellectually understand it. And if you do not solve that, you will not be able to make the difference. And so we, as Dalberg, really got on the front foot of saying we want to build the largest advisory firm in Africa. And actually, that's what we are now. We're the largest advisory firm in Africa, and globally, we're the largest impact-first advisory firm. With our 30 locations across the world. And that's a really powerful footprint that we've been able to put together that then comes to where is Africa now and where is Africa headed, right? And so some of the things that, are obvious to anybody who watches the continent, there's a baseline why we all believe Africa has a significant potential for the future, right? We have incredible, land for agriculture. We have incredible natural resources. We have an extremely young population, and that, has the potential for being a demographic dividend and we're hoping that it becomes a dividend rather than a bomb. Young people are the easiest and such a critical force of transforming social norms. So there's something that we all know that says Africa is in an interesting place, but that has been true since the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and now in the 2010s and getting into the 2020s. That's always been true. Those facts are there. But the reason why I'm even excited about this next decade is because we're seeing the emergence of a couple of things. Digitization has been talked a lot about. Naturally, over the last 2 days, in part because of Stanford and where you're located. But just as powerfully is, which hasn't been talked about as much, is digitization of governments themselves. Anybody who had dealt with any government pre-COVID knew that to have a meeting, you had to send letters, you had to have, make appointments, and government was just not digital, right? Today, almost every country runs its cabinet meetings virtually. Right, by default. There's registration, business registration, land registration, things that really fuel the ability for the economy to move are all of a sudden shifting, have been accelerated to being much more digital than was the case before. And government's own digitization, I think, is a critical piece that hasn't been talked about, and we should keep a close eye on, because those governments that are able to digitize and provide services to their decentralized citizens wherever they are going to create interesting environments for the future. The second one is, again, it's very nascent, is the Continental Free Trade Area that was ratified last year, and we're beginning to see, what that means. It's still fairly early, and I think there's a lot of interest and hope that it succeeds, that finally getting Africans to trade with Africans will transform the way that the velocity with which we grow as a continent, that discrete countries grow across goods and services and capital. And almost all the fintech examples that have been talked about, many of them now operate across multiple countries. That's actually what makes it really attractive, is your ability to operate in Nigeria and Kenya and Ethiopia, really target, and South Africa, really targeting those economic centers and populations that have been previously not served. We're seeing that has the potential to really accelerate Africa's own future. And then the final one, which I think is important for the people on this conference, is the Pan-African networks. It is so much easier now, because we are much more interconnected, to find somebody who on the other side will be an important counterpart to yourself. Right? So, at Stanford, even on this call, right, on this conference, now one or two people in Nigeria who are capable, forward-leaning, and want to do the right thing. That connection is just as valuable as the South African who now knows an Angolan, somebody from Benin who now knows somebody in Ghana. And those networks are part of what will allow us to really find opportunity and take advantage of opportunities that sit in front of us. On the leadership side, since I took over as global managing partner for Dalberg, it was crazy. My first day was January 1, 2020, and I remember being on a call with a World Economic Forum I had put together because of my work around risk and resilience and pandemics. And they had somebody saying, we're hearing about this random flu, kind of coming out of Wuhan, China. We don't quite know what it is or what's going on, but, flag, some people should, keep an eye out on that. And seeing how that has transformed not only the world, but also in a lot of ways my own term as a global managing partner for Dalberg has really brought the questions of leadership to the fore. And there's a couple of things that I think are super important and super critical to keep in mind. One is the leaders who naturally come from a place of empathy and naturally come from a place of compassion for fellow human being are the ones who've done well. And let me explain why. In the traditional way of thinking about leadership from a corporate perspective, if I was CEO of a company, I thought about my customers and I thought about my distribution network, right? I rarely thought about the people who sit behind the distribution network. If it's an FMCG product, I'm not thinking about the mamamboga or the guy who sells at the kiosk. I'm not thinking about his life. I'm just thinking of him as a statistic. But those leaders who started off by saying, this will affect them and will affect my employees, will affect the way that business is done. What needs to happen for those people to continue to operate? And what things am I doing as a business to either enable them or give them a safety net to be able to survive through this craziness that is coming? And so again, to the FMCG example, what do you do for your distribution network? Again, it's not distribution, it's people who sell your product. What are the kind of terms and conditions, and how does that relationship shift? What happens to your own employees, right? Most people try to move to, work from home kind of environment, but you actually didn't know where your employees lived, right? Did they have power? Did they have internet? Did they have places where they could actually, be quiet and be on calls and so on and so forth? Or are they in a large household without that kind of level of privacy? Did they live with extended family who they were really worried about now all of a sudden because their grandmothers and their parents lived in the same environment, and those were the people that we knew early on were vulnerable to COVID? Those kinds of questions were top of mind for employees, and the leaders who stood in and said, we want to be part of figuring out the answer for this. You can clearly see that there was a marked difference in the way the businesses responded, as well as the businesses that actually did well. So that's, I think, from a going forward perspective, when you recognize that the velocity and amplitude of disruption that is coming to us is only growing, is going to be that's going to be one of the key things. The second thing is the ability to look at issues with fresh eyes. We are in an imperfect world, and you will never have enough data to make the decisions you think need to be made. And so, are you constantly able to step back and say, this is what we knew about COVID 2 weeks ago. Here's what we know now, and would I do something different? Right? That ability is quite difficult because it requires leaders to be able to say, actually, the decision I made 2 weeks ago with that information is wrong. This is now the right decision with the information that I have, and actually 2 weeks from now, it could be wrong. And creating the ability to have that relationship and truly be a leader that people can listen to and work through those turbulent times becomes so important from a leadership perspective, and not getting stuck with path dependency. The final thing I will say, because I know we are almost at time, is the difference between where we are now and where Africa is going to be one critical thing, is, are there people who are willing to get shit done? So even those who are at Stanford, even those who are at premier business schools in the world, the gap between the knowledge you have and somebody sitting in University of Lagos or University of Nairobi or University of Ghana or Sheshi or whatever else, that gap is closing dramatically, right? It's no longer a knowledge question. It will come back to those things that I talked about earlier. Do you have the context of the ecosystem? Do you have the networks and the relationships to actually get shit done? And that's I'll pause there. Happy to answer if there are any questions that anybody's typed in, because I can't see what's in the chat, but I'll hand over back to you, Madam MC.